Hello, my friends. Welcome to the ThePCelitist. I am Woodsie. Today we have a special presentation for you. The illustrious fellows over at TruePCGaming.com had invited us to do a roundtable discussion with them. They had been doing a few of these episodes. I think they're on episode 7. And it's starring us, or we're guest starring. So I really hope you enjoy this cross-promotional effort. We had a lot of fun doing it with them. And they sent us the files afterward, and I hope you enjoy it. If you ever wanted an hour-long discussion with the ThePCelitist, this is what it would sound like. So please enjoy.
Hello, everybody out there. Welcome to another very special episode of the TruePCGaming podcast. This time a cross-promotional effort, because today we're joined by the folks from ThePCelitist, Woodsie and Shepherd, if you guys want to say hi real quick.
Hello. Hello there.
I'll give you guys we're really we've already been talking for 20 minutes before we even started, so we have pretty good rapport with these guys, I'd say. I'm gonna just introduce the topics real quick, and then I'll give them a chance to talk about their site for a minute in case you guys don't know what it is. But today we're gonna talk about games that we consider to be overrated in terms of, you know, a game that maybe was a big hit or got a big critical reception, and for whatever reason it didn't quite do it for us personally. Then we're going to talk about the other side of that coin, which is games that we consider to be underrated, either because just better than people gave them credit for, tragically undersold, or in my example, it'll be a game with a lot of quirks that was still very, very endearing despite that. And then we'll probably talk a little bit about kind of the state of digital distribution, as all of us being PC gamers have a bit to say about all of these different marketplaces and some of the maybe less popular ones and the benefits of those. It should be interesting for me, since being stuck in Germany where a lot of the stuff doesn't work. I'm interested to hear what the advantages of some of them are. But before we launch into all that, why don't you guys say a little bit about your site? And for the people listening off of your site, this probably seems weird, but go ahead.
Well, so that everyone recognizes my voice, I am Woodsie from the ThePCelitist. The site probably came about from I thought that there was a lack of honest talk about video games, what platforms actually bring to the table, and I've been a lover of PC gaming since back in the Atari days. I was playing on Atari, so I want to start a channel where we have honest talk about the industry, because of the broad issues that are going on today. And I'll introduce Shepherd too. What do you think our channel excels at? Why is it awesome?
Frankly, really, it's, as he said, it's an honest discussion about not just games themselves. We started out doing mostly reviews and some lower level discussions, but we also like to take a step back and look at the bigger picture of video gaming as an industry, as well as how it compares to some of the other entertainment industries, music and movies and things like that. And so we try and be as honest as possible and point out when we think certainly PC gaming has the advantages over other types of gaming, but also embrace the truths, such as, for example, in one of our videos, we talked about pirating and how it's the bane of PC gaming. So we embrace all points. We certainly have had disagreements with some of our viewers, but we welcome that feedback, and we just want to have an honest and civil back and forth about this industry, which, after all, whether we disagree or not, we all love so much.
Right. It just really is about the discussion.
Yeah,
exactly. We want to have the discussion. Yeah.
You guys sound like competition. I don't like this. Adam, let's cut these guys off.
Well, really
edit this podcast out. Yeah.
You're making me feel uncomfortable.
Oh, by the way, guys, Adam's here too.
The second in a row, Phil.
I know. This should be a podcast gimmick. But I honestly wasn't aware of you guys until Adam spoke to you and kind of threw your site out there for us and said, "Oh, what do you guys think about having these on the show?" And I was pretty impressed by what you guys did. Initially, when I saw these YouTube videos, I was like, "Oh no, it's going to be like one of those guys that just plays a game and talks over it, and it's annoying." Like, and then you can find the secret golden star by going like, "Oh no." no. But it was cool. It was a real interesting, basically like a video podcast, and you guys have kind of footage of accompanying games that you talk about, and real interesting discussions, like you say, real kind of high level stuff, maybe a little bit more of that than you might expect from a typical podcast. But I do like some of the meta conversation about the industry as a whole. So I would recommend to our listeners to check them out. Not too much, but no. In all seriousness, I think you guys do a really cool thing, and I'm glad that you came on this with us. And I hope we can have a fun time here, and maybe even do some more cross promotional stuff in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great to meet more people in the community who's doing the same thing. We like the objective view, the top down, because you got to get the big stuff right, and then you get all the little stuff right. So.
Certainly, but we're not above petty squabbling. Let's just get that out of the way.
We're going to be doing plenty of that today, I assume, given I don't know if is there anything else you guys want to mention about your site? I mean, obviously we'll have the links to it and everything in the description for this show, but if there's anything else you want to say about it real quick before we launch into the topics, feel free.
Sure. There are some videos we've done. We've had about 55 or so, and some of them are topical, but most of our videos actually are not. They're they can be watched in any sequence. We have a lot of earlier videos that we still are very proud of, but older videos, especially on a site that puts out a lot of them, they tend to get buried, and people generally don't go back and take a look. So we actually have relatively few videos that it may seem like, oh, okay, well, this is kind of old news, but I think with any gaming site, and I think this can probably be said for your site as well, is the perspective. And the topic may be time dependent, but the perspective may not be. So I would just invite people, really in any site you go to, but particularly for the two we're being mentioned here today, just take a look back. If you like what we do, take a look back and see other topics. We have done several of them, and we still have several more. And we always appreciate a video we put up 9 months ago gets a comment, and some guy has something that was never considered before. We love getting that feedback, not just a week after the video posts.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I think that's a really cool thing about these more discussion-oriented websites, because when you talk about that more traditional perspective of stuff getting buried and people not checking it out, that's especially true on traditional game sites where you get a lot of just generic, like, boilerplate previews of the next Gears of War or something, like, yes, here's a new character model from this game, and obviously after the game's out, nobody cares. But in an atmosphere where it's all about discussion, right, then checking out that old stuff can be very interesting. You can see how people felt about something then versus now, if anything's changed, if it hasn't, or what's stayed the same. And I think a conversation from a year ago can be just as interesting as one now, whereas yes, it's been revealed that there'll be an M16 in this game is maybe not as timeless.
It's nice for us that we could always go back a year from now, and see how right we've always been.
Right. And there's few better feelings in the world than when someone will comment on a recent video and say, oh, it reminds me of what you guys said in this video, which is hasn't been really looked at in much in the last several months. And it's nice to see that continuity of people engaging the material, engaging the perspective, because I think when you look at some of the more higher level discussions, when you can see these patterns and trends emerging in the industry and from game to game, it really enriches the conversation and elevates the dialogue. So we're excited to have seen some of that and hope to see more.
All right, guys. Well, I guess with that being said, we can just hop onto these topics. So we'll start out with the overrated games. Overrated games, boys. Lay them on me. What do you think?
Well, I mean, we could start with the Modern Warfare series, but I mean, that's just...
I feel like, and that's one thing we talked about beforehand, is how much of this do we want to be about Modern Warfare? Because I feel like almost everyone, and you can see it from the user scores on Metacritic, almost everyone says they're overrated, so it's like beating the dead horse who was already beaten twice before.
I kind of see where you're going with that one. It is one of those series that everybody says that about, and yet they do continue to garner such positive review scores and whatnot. Yeah.
So let's just assume that we can all agree that Modern Warfare, to whatever degree you dislike it, people generally feel that it's overrated.
Yes.
Let's move on to games. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I've always felt, and I know I've gotten flack for this on our channel, but I've always felt the Elder Scroll games. I haven't played Skyrim, okay, but the ones that previously from Morrowind and Oblivion were overrated because
Adam cut his mic.
I know.
Actually, I wrote my list, and Oblivion just happened to be on it. So.
Well, guys, it's been fun doing this with you, but no, I'd like to really. I don't get to invest in any of this. I'm definitely curious what you guys think about that, because they're games I enjoy, but it's not that hard to imagine since they seem to be so revered in the sort of especially the PC role-playing audience. So let's hear it.
Sure, and just a quick side note, just to kind of get a sense where we're coming from, Woodsie is much more of a historian as it revolves PC gaming. I got into PC gaming later than he did, so you'll tend to hear him give more of a historical perspective and know more about older games than myself. So he has much more depth of experience with these kind of things. So I, for example, have played Skyrim and very briefly played Oblivion, but not the ones before. So you'll get a bit of an A side, B side.
Right. Yeah, because I played.
I said, what about Arena?
Oh yeah, Arena. You know, I never actually. I've had Arena on my PC at a time, and I like created a character, but I'm not willing to say I played it. So. But the Elder Scroll games, we're talking about modern Elder Scroll games, you know. Whether the series was great in the past, that's one thing. But now, as you said, the series is revered. Every new game that comes out is like the gold standard for RPG gaming. That's notwithstanding like BioWare, you know, those types of games. But I just felt that the combat and a lot of the gameplay was just flat out boring. Like, yes, it's fun to explore it, but once I felt like I explored this place, there's really no reason for me to come back. I've met this character, I've talked to that guy, I saw the end of this quest, but frankly, I'm kind of a melee class kind of guy. Whenever I have the chance to be a melee character, I will pick that sword and board and go in there fighting, and just the sword just swinging around in front of me, I just never thought it was very fun. It's just comes down to a fun level, you know. Once I've explored this place, I'm done.
Yeah, that's something I can definitely understand. I mean, part of the reason that I liked Skyrim, I think my experience with Skyrim was a little bit more enjoyable than my experience with Oblivion, because for me, a lot of that enjoyment comes from that exploration of the world, and the world in Skyrim was a little bit more handcrafted. It had less of like the copy-pasted dungeons and whatnot, but even though they had improved the gameplay between those games, or at least in my opinion, the combat felt a little nicer. It still wasn't as nice as a lot of other games out there where you play them for the fun of the combat. You know, I would never say that the combat in that game is as fun or as engaging as the combat in something like Dragon Age or whatever. So I can definitely understand not really digging it that much on that level. And once I do explore the world, it's not a game I'd ever want to go back to play a second time, even though I know you can have like radically different skills for your character. But once I've kind of seen the world, I just sort of think, well, I guess that's kind of it for me and this game.
That's exactly my feeling on it. So.
And I put about 40 hours into Skyrim and really made my primary character was an archer for the most part, and I also made kind of a sword and board guy. And there were many good elements of Skyrim that I felt were certainly justified in their praise. I thought the mechanic of the skill trees and how you could customize that I thought was pretty brilliant. I felt that the world was indeed beautiful and huge. The character and armor modeling were great, but with regard to the openness of the world, and people kept talking about how you can go anywhere and explore anything, and I said, yes, that's true, but kind of like in Red Dead Redemption, I don't really care, because it may look pretty, but yeah, there's a snowy peak up there, but I get to the top and it's completely barren of all life for the most part, with the exception of like a huge troll or something. But it felt like it was all about aesthetic at that point, and there was no reason for me to explore the entire world. I also felt, and this is something that I've mentioned in prior videos that bothered me, is how quickly you become the center of this single player universe. It's like you start your character, and within a very short time, you're Dragonborn. You're the most important piece of this universe. I hate being the MVP of a game so quickly. I feel like I didn't earn it. Just by
that's sort of a problem all those games have, I guess. That they all seem to very quickly get to the point that the whole world somehow revolves around your character, and maybe that Skyrim was one of the more egregious examples, at least in that series, of that happening.
Well, yeah, not only that, your decisions within the game world. I mean, I played Skyrim probably about 50 hours or so, and I agree with everybody here. You know, the exploration was great, but the decisions that I made, it didn't feel like I was making those decisions. Nobody around me changed the way that they felt about me because I made these decisions. Like, oh, well, I saved the world. Oh, yeah. Oh, hey, how you doing?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that one thing that was cool is going from town to town, how there were different factions. You could join the Thieves Guild. I can't remember the name of the faction in the main town now. It's been a while since I played it, but I liked that you could kind of choose whether or not you wanted to join those organizations. But it also did feel like, okay, well, what really is the value of not joining that organization? All I'm doing is robbing myself of some quest chains and maybe some quest specific or organization specific gear. So I did like some of those elements, but to me, with regard to combat, I felt like the combat was very anticlimactic, and particularly as an archer, there were times, and in one of our videos, I did a kind of a slideshow of all of the kind of head or face shots I had with arrows, but frequently it felt like, you come upon a group of 4 or 5 guys, you take out 1 or 2 before they're able to really come after you, and then really what it is me running backward and trying to hit them, hit them center mass with an arrow. It didn't feel tactical to me. It didn't feel reactive, whereas something like Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning or even Terra, where I feel like, and I know, melee and range is very different, but I didn't feel like I had that sense of being tactical in combat. It was more about how can I just run away as often as possible. And it just,
Right.
after a while, the combat felt very formulaic and boring to me.
Right. To go back real quick to the idea of being the MVP of the world, I remember very clearly in my mind playing Ultima, I want to say 7, the pagan.
That was 8.
That was 8.
Yeah.
I remember going along, like, I think you start at, like, a beach, and you're walking along the ocean front, and you come across a girl being executed. Like, they have her head on a stalk, and they're ready to, like, execute her. And I remember, like, going, like, hey, stop! I'm going to, like, interrupt them from killing this little girl, And they just got mad at me for interrupting what was going on, and they killed me. Like, instantly.
That's
I was
awesome.
like, oh, I can't just be the guy every time and just run in and go, don't kill this little girl. Because they just turn and, like, shoot me with an arrow, I'm dead.
It's part of the reason I dig a lot of those old school, like either actually old or more old school style games, is that you do have that early on. Like, you don't feel like the savior of the universe immediately, and at the beginning of the game you actually are weak, and a random guard doing something, if you mess with them before you gain 10 levels, that guard will slice you right in two. So you have to, and I guess it's that much more rewarding when you actually do become powerful in those games, and maybe that's something that is missing to some extent to some of the, let's say, more mainstream games that are, a little more accessible to a bigger range of people.
To take this a little bit further in other mediums, the main protagonist, to connect with him, for the most part, in the very beginning, he's kind of got to be like a schlub, right?
Prison.
You have, kind of like in the last Starfighter, the guy. This is what I'm thinking about, right?
Yeah.
So he, there's really nothing. He's just a dude, who's good at a video game, and then he gets himself in a situation where he doesn't know what's going on. He's not comfortable with anything, and as the movie goes along, he progressively becomes more confident and more better. And I think that's what you're missing in these games,
I basically want my protagonist to be John McClane. I want him to be a guy who, in spite of himself, manages to survive situations, especially in the last Die Hard film, where he launches a car, and no matter how unbelievable, he launches a car up to and hits and kills a helicopter with it. And
that
then
was
he's
awesome.
Surprised, like, did you see what I just did? I kind of like that. And there's one other point I wanted to make on this, and this is really just I completely understand that I may be alone in this. There's a suspension of disbelief that you just have to have as a gamer. You step into a world that has orcs and dragons and wizards. You have to understand that things can't always have the logical consistency that you would want them to. But one thing that stands out to me, and I may just be kind of nitpicking here, with regard to believability, is in a medieval setting, I do heroic things for this one town, and they think the world of me. Okay, that's fine. When I run to, directly to the next town, I basically ran as fast as I could. When I get there, they already know what heroic things I've done for the other town. And there certainly was no faster way to get there than the way I went, unless there was a carrier pigeon. And it bothers me that I get to a new town and I'm already a celebrity. I'd like to go to a new town and either have to prove what I did, or tell them, and then it's up to them whether or not they want to believe me. Or I go to a new town and I think, oh, my character, I'm so confident, I'm so wonderful. And I get there and they say, who are you?
Yeah. Well, Mage from Town A obviously communicated with Mage from Town B and explained to them what you did, and it filtered to the rest of the town.
The fastest lines of communication is Mage. Really?
Yeah.
That is true.
Yeah. So there you go. That's a perfectly good hand wave explanation
you
for that.
just resolved for me. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
There wasn't the Facebook status update. OFG Shepherd is Jesus.
What a brilliant hero. Okay. We've already gone a little down that rabbit hole, but I guess let's see what else. Adam, what do you got for overrated?
Well, hell, I'm going to go in a completely and totally different direction.
That's fine.
I feel that just kind of thinking about this is MVP baseball. In 99s to into the early 2000s.
You can't say that about
I'm
MVP.
doing a sports game. So leave me.
I will do this with you, Adam. I'm there with you.
MVP baseball, when compared to a game like High Heat, it's not even close. MVP sold more, was more popular because EA was on the box. That's everything about MVP baseball was overly arcadey. You were hitting 500-foot home runs. There was no strategic way to do your pitches. You had this stupid little pitch meter that really didn't mean anything.
This game sounds awesome. Reminds you of the Bigs. I love that game.
And I always hated the fact. I mean, I've said on previous podcasts that I got my start in this whole PC gaming thing in the early 2000s. In 99 or so, and one of the first games I ever played on the PC, on a modern PC anyway, was High Heat. And then I played MVP, and then I just wanted to, destroy the CD. I hated it so much. I hated everything it stood for, and so that's how I feel about that.
I actually was disappointed in the MVPs up until MVP 2004, which I thought was the best baseball game I ever played. I was a triple play 99 guy.
Yeah.
And the great thing about that, and here's the only reason why, is there was a cheat code that you could use that no matter what contact you made on the baseball, it was an automatic home run. And I really only used it for comedic purposes to show my sister. But it doesn't matter if it was a bunt or a foul ball or whatever. But you put in the cheat code, I'm playing in a dome, right? And I bunt a home run over 50,000 feet. And if that isn't realism to me, then I don't know what is.
Right. It's realistic to you, because if you were on the mound, you would do that.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, I do think you speak to an interesting point about how sometimes the game that is most popular in a certain genre or of a certain type can be that simply because it gets so much more media coverage, or because it has a big developer or a big publisher backing it up. And you might have this other game out there that's far better, but because it's more obscure, nobody really gives it any play, right? I mean, I guess this is something we'll get into in the next topic, but that can be tragic to see, right? When this big first-person shooter is so popular, and then you got all these better games coming out and nobody cares because everybody's just talking about Call of Duty or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And go ahead.
In Oblivion, I want to bring up another point about that. And what killed it for me, I liked Oblivion in almost every other way, but what killed it for me is having 3 voice actors.
Oh, yes. Man, yeah, that was brutal.
So much. It's like, well, wait a minute, I just talked to a Nord, and now there's an Argonian, but they have the same voice. What in the what's...
The best part was the female voice they use everywhere when she was the orc. Good day. I am Grogmug Falogmug. What?
Really what you're asking for is for a game to be voiced entirely by Sean Connery. Because no matter what he plays, he's a Lithuanian sub-commander who happens to be Scottish. That's really what you're asking for.
I could go for that. Yeah, that was definitely an annoying thing about that game. And in the second game, they brought in something like 80 people, and you still sometimes kind of got that sense. I don't know. I guess with games that are fully voice acted, it's kind of an unavoidable thing unless every single NPC has a different voice actor or something.
Yeah, it's like when Robin Williams tries to do another voice, it's always his black preacher voice, no matter what.
All right, guys.
Your turn, Phil.
Yeah, I'm about to drop the gauntlet on this one because I've got, we'll see what you guys think of it, but probably a very controversial, very unpopular choice for a game that is highly acclaimed and didn't quite do it for me. So here I go. Flamers, haters, come out of the woodwork to comment on how wrong I am because I'm sure you will. Portal.
I was just going to say, I just leaned over to Woodsie and said, I'll bring up Portal after this.
Oh, man! Yeah, for me,
Wait,
look.
Portal or Portal 2?
Wait, Portal or Portal 2?
Let's establish this.
Portal 1.
Portal 1. Okay, we're going to sign off now. Sorry, go ahead, Phil. Speak your piece.
Okay. It's not that I feel that it's a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. I actually do think it was a fun game, and I'd even say it was like a great game, but people talk about it like it was the be-all, end-all, game of the year, game of the decade on all those lists between, 2000 and 2010. It's like way up there. Yes, it's completely revolutionized, redefined the genre, and blah, blah, blah. And I can agree with some of the points about it making the first-person mechanics more accessible by presenting them in a novel way and yada, yada. The first-person puzzle game, it's an interesting concept, but I just didn't quite... Maybe because the game was like fairly limited in scope, at least the first one. Like for me, Portal was one of those games that I had a real fun afternoon playing through it, and then that was basically it. Like I never felt any compulsion to go back to it again, and I consider it to be more along the same lines of like fun little DLC games that I like, and maybe years later would go back to or hear about and go, oh yeah, that was a fun game, rather than the whole kind of, oh man, this game changed everything and is the greatest game I've ever played. So that's kind of where I fall on that. So I'm not saying it's bad, at least, but I do think that it's maybe a bit
overrated, which is the topic.
Yeah. So a bit like the movie Citizen Kane, where yes, we acknowledge it did so many things for filmmaking, but really, it's the best movie of all time.
yeah, I'll go with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that just to hop in real quick, because I know that Woodsie certainly wants to get in on this. I was actually going to mention Portal 2. And I'll kind of cover it very quickly. Compared to Portal 1, which I thought was fun and difficult in a way that games are very typically incapable of mixing those two, I felt like Portal 2, we played through it individually and then we played through co-op together. We didn't feel challenged at all. It felt like truly the game Portal 2 was made for a younger, less sophisticated audience. And we're not really ashamed to say that. Portal 1, I think the only counterpoint I would make to yours is I really don't think they intended it to be the things that it was later said to be. It certainly wasn't.
No, I don't think so either. I agree with you on that. I mean, because when it came out, it almost seemed like they were just touting it as this fun little extra thing in the orange box, and wasn't it just a side project thing that they were throwing together, and it sort of gained enough steam that they said, oh well, let's just release this and put it in the orange box, and then it became.
That's exactly right.
Nice pun, by the way. It gained enough steam.
Oh, crap. I did not mean that at all. I'm so sorry, everyone. That is terrible.
Boo.
I'm so sorry. I swear that was unintentional. I would never.
What would you say was the origin of that?
I would never make such a groan-worthy pun intentionally. I'm very sorry.
There's my opinion on the Portal series. Portal 1 was just something that came with the orange box. You were all buying it to get Half-Life the episode 2, I believe. And then Portal came with it, and you're like, man, this is so fun. I can't believe how fun this is. It's just a little thing. When I heard Portal 2 was coming out, I was so disappointed with that game because of the fact that when we play games, Valve is really good at this. It teaches us an aspect of the game, and then later it'll teach us another aspect of the game, and then it compiles these challenges together, and we have to figure out how to use both at the same time, right? So Portal 1 had taught me all these things about how portals work, how I fling myself, and all these great ideas. And I'm like, wow, Portal 2 is really going to lay it on thick. I'm going to have to be flinging myself like 4, 5, 6 times. I'm going to have to do all this crazy stuff.
While making pancakes.
And then it comes out, and they got rid of the flinging aspect almost altogether by having the fling pads. So you never had to really actually manually fling yourself. I have a theory that has to do with the fact that it was on console, so they had to adapt for the controller, which is not as fast as a mouse. So basically they said, well, let's just bring in this other thing, the goo.
Yeah, the white goo that you bounce on.
And I felt like this isn't challenging. I used to have a lot of dexterity with my mouse in Portal 1, and then they just kind of threw that all out the window.
I also felt like the size of the levels just got enormous in Portal 2, but the traversable terrain was still so small. I mean, yeah, I'm in this huge warehouse that's 1.5 miles high, but it's still
there's no
freaking linear.
Yeah, there's no reason that it couldn't be really tiny, because there's just a huge gap in the middle that you can't do anything with anyway. So it's just kind of well, this is a console game, but it kind of reminded me of you guys remember the game Ico or however you say it. Sorry?
I know of it, but I don't.
Yeah.
I never...
Because I thought one of the problems with that game that sort of and you could say this about Portal 2 as well, I guess, that it impeded the gameplay, that they made some of the environments and some of the areas just huge for the sake of them being huge. So you sit there and you play it and be like, wow, like this is really big and impressive looking, but then you'd have to slog through this huge area and it would take you like 3 minutes to reach this ladder, and then you would go, this room could have been a third of the size, and it would have been a lot more fun for me to get through this room instead of having just this unnecessarily huge area. And I guess since Portal 2 you can get around that time thing with portals, but it did kind of feel almost just big for the sake of being big, for the sake of having visually different levels. And I do wonder if some of those other elements that was the impetus behind those, that they just were like, oh, well, let's introduce these gels and these different things so that there can just be new gameplay mechanics and new things in this sequel. So instead of coming up with more different ways to work in puzzles in the original style, they just introduced these new mechanics. Every few levels there'd be some new bouncy block or whatever, and then you'd do puzzles around that thing, and then they'd introduce another gel, then you do puzzles with both gels. And I guess the way it would ramp up with combining concepts felt a little more artificial and a little more transparent in Portal 2, because instead of the concept being things you'd learn, they were like physical things in the world that you would manipulate.
Yeah, and I certainly think the new mechanics were very good, but I just don't feel that they were introduced or they were manifested in such a way that created a whole lot of difficulty. And I think that one of the things that I thought would also help in the kind of the learning curve aspect, which we wish Portal 1 had as well, and I felt this way about Mirror's Edge too. Why not just make, and I don't think it would be that difficult to make this huge open world, untimed practice facility that you could manipulate, you could use all the new gels, you could use all the new features, and just run. I would spend more time doing that than playing the actual game, certainly. It would just be this huge playground. And here, experiment with the mechanics, and I bet you in that arena you'd find ways to do a puzzle that you never could have within the strict confines of having this functional fixedness of I can only use this thing this way.
Right. Mm-hmm. We wanted that in the co-op. Why isn't there a room me and you could just go in and just play around with all this stuff?
I bet you I could splatter your face on that wall over there. Let's try it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I did the co-op with my brother, and we definitely we did have a few moments where we found really non-traditional ways of doing puzzles, but maybe it would have been more common had there been something like that for us to experiment with, because that hub room, because there is a hub room, but there's nothing in it, so it's just
We played a lot in the hub room, didn't we?
Yeah, we was really more of a how close can I get you to that walkway up there, but not. And there were several times over vent, I would just hear Woodsie say, "Oh my god." Why would you do that?
So you heard it here first. Valve, make an open world Portal game. It would be awesome.
There you go.
Seriously,
that'd be awesome.
Okay, well, does anyone have anything else they want to throw out for this topic before we move on to the next one? Because I am wary of running like 5 hours long. So.
Sure. Shepherd does very quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
I felt that Crysis 2, though an enjoyable game to play through, I felt that it lost the soul and spirit of the first Crysis game, and I think a big part of that had to do, A, with the fact that it was ported to consoles mainly, and B, because Crysis, kind of like Portal, not in the sense that, Crysis certainly wasn't this kind of add-on to an Orange Box kind of thing, but I felt like Crysis to me was a diamond in the rough, and it was so much greater than they had even intended it to be, and it felt to me like making the sequel to the first Saw movie. They had created something which really connected with people, and they didn't know what to do with it next. And so it felt to me like the people who made Crysis 2, they made a fun and a pretty shooter, to be sure, but it was, and this is more about, not in terms of how much I enjoyed it, but that game was hyped like I've never seen it, and we were so excited for it until the moment we heard it was going to be ported to consoles. That's usually for games, but it's weird. Specifically with Crysis 2, that's how
it's weird with the Crysis series. Crysis comes out, and I'm pretty sure the community liked the game better than Crytek did.
Yeah, certainly.
You're probably right.
Crysis
now,
2 was generic 6.9-5 generic shooter. That's what I would say about
Are we going to address the because for me, Crysis 1 I thought was an amazing game, but I was really not so keen on all the stuff with the aliens once they were introduced, because spoilers for Crysis 1, but I really preferred the gameplay of the world when you were just fighting other people and you would see some installation or whatever from far off and figure out your approach and how to use all your different powers. And part of the reason Crysis 2 is maybe not quite as engaging is that it put a lot more constriction on the environments. I guess they tried to have the best of both worlds, like an environment that's smaller and more workable that still gives you some freedom for how to approach, but doesn't come near like Crysis that just felt like you were on this island and you have these missions and you can deviate from them as much as you want. But exactly. Then once I was fighting the aliens, it just a lot of the fun gameplay experimentation went out the window. At least to me. I don't know. How did you guys feel about that?
Well, I'm right there with you, Phil, in terms of how the alien dynamic of the story changed the game for me in terms of how I enjoyed it. I was just, I'll just say it, I loved killing North Koreans for the first few hours of the game. I certainly agree. In Crysis 2, I felt like if you're going to do urban warfare, it just felt so linear. And I thought, Crysis, with the amazing suit you have, you'll be able to do things in a city that you just couldn't do in the jungle, even though I loved the game world of the first game. But I think it's kind of, with regard to how the aliens came in, it's for me how I felt about Assassin's Creed. It's for me how I felt about the show Lost. It just suddenly you're like, wait, what happened? Yeah, where did this element come from? And it took me out of the game.
Yeah, really. Like weird out of nowhere to, yeah.
Yeah. And also the fact that my game was bugged and I couldn't actually finish Crysis right before the final huge alien is, and spoiler alert as well, right before you kill him, basically, I killed him, but he suddenly came back up out of the water and kept fighting, and it kept looping over and over again. So I want to be able to say that I beat Crysis, but technically I haven't.
I think that might have actually happened to me also. And then I had to look up how to. There was some way, or I reloaded the game, then the second time it worked, or something weird like that. But that sounds vaguely familiar of nightmares I've had before with that game.
A big red flag for me with Crysis 2 was the fact that they only released a multiplayer demo. I mean, you're going to release. Yeah. So you're taking a game like Crysis, and you're now going to push a multiplayer aspect to it, and not give anybody a taste of single player.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And the UI was awful. I mean, it was overly busy. It was just, it was consoleized. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I can. Some elements of it I agreed with more than others. Like I did like some of the. For instance, when you use the armor, I believe it would just have like a little bit of the sort of hex things along the border of the screen instead of having an icon pop up. And usually I dig when games do little things like that, and some of the simplification and streamlining stuff made sense, but at other times I couldn't escape the feeling of like, yeah, if this wouldn't have been on Xbox, I would have probably had a few other suit powers. I would have probably had bigger levels. I would have probably had a lot of other cool things going on.
I think what, for me, the biggest thing that changed in the shift was the pacing of your person in Crysis. In Crysis 1, I was like a ninja. I could come in, stealth, I would run super speed, grab this guy, I'd jump on the roof, I'd do all these crazy maneuvers, and in Crysis 2, you really feel more like a tank. Like you're just kind of this overpowered like mech suit. You're not fast, like you were in Crysis 1. Crisis 1, you were doing all sorts of maneuvers. In multiplayer, you're just like jumping over jeeps when they're trying to run over you and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. But I will give it some props for. I wound up digging the multiplayer of that game a lot more than I expected to. So I'll give it some points there. I guess that was kind of a cool multiplayer mode. The gimmick of the different power loadouts was kind of cool, at least to me.
Well, if we're finished up with the games we don't necessarily like, why don't we flip it a little bit and guys, why don't you go ahead and tell us about some of the underrated games or the hidden gems that you liked that pretty much nobody knows about.
Are we talking historically or just contemporary?
Whatever you want.
Whatever you want, really. It's all good, man.
I think one of the most underrated games ever was Magic Carpet.
Magic Carpet was awesome.
Magic Carpet was fan-freaking-tastic. It was such a great game. And I played that game I don't know how long. And back in the day, playing on the internet when Magic Carpet was around, was always a challenge. Everyone knows that, And playing with a traditional modem, 56K, and there's no networking, there's nothing. I spent hours figuring out how to get online on Magic Carpet so I could play online. That's how much I love that game. And when most people you say, have you ever heard of Magic Carpet? People just scratch their head and just think of an Aladdin movie and then move on.
No, forgive maybe I give I don't want to sound too pretentious because maybe I was gonna say maybe I give people too much credit, but that sounds like such a jerk thing to say. But
we're all
maybe I'm misremembering, but I thought that game actually was like kind of a hit when it came out, or am I just misremembering that? Because I remember that game getting like good reviews and being quite popular on consoles as well. Because there was like a Saturn version and I think a PlayStation version of that as well.
A lot of Bullfrog's games that came out were what I feel were really ahead of its time, actually. And like you said, the Portal series, like Portal 1, is looked at as like finally the first like art piece of gaming. Now we could call it art because of Portal.
Yeah, don't even get me started.
Which is all this crazy stuff. And you see games now, and they go like, there's actual terraforming, and there's all this stuff that you can do, and spells. Magic Carpet had terraforming. You built castles. You had like aerial combat. You had monsters. You had an economy you had to control. All this stuff, and no one hails it as being so forward thinking, but it actually was.
Yeah, I can see your point there, that despite being, even if it was a hit, it deserved more of a reputation as a revolutionary game than it got. And I guess that's something you could definitely generalize about Bullfrog stuff, because I'm thinking back to the Populo series and Dungeon Keeper, and those games are just... And what, Theme Park and Theme Hospital, those were Bullfrog too, right?
All those... I have Theme Hospital on my desktop right now.
Yeah, all those felt just super. Oh yeah, good old games. Plug for them. Theme Hospital, brilliant game. But all that stuff really did feel ahead of its time. I mean, Dungeon Keeper 2 it's a shame it barely works with modern systems, but I consider that game to still be really fun today. And it's just it is kind of a shame. And I guess I can see, in a way, not to give too much credit to this because it's a move everybody hates, but why Peter Molyneux would have wanted to move towards making Fable something that could be like a hit more on a mainstream level, because after you're doing all this really, really cool stuff for years and years and it goes kind of underappreciated, and then you do other stuff, let's say.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think if we're talking about things that weren't appreciated or underappreciated, just Bullfrog as a company, all the games they put out I think they were kind of underappreciated at the time and now currently. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'd say there's a few companies, I'd say Looking Glass and Origin, which, everybody got mad when they named Origin after Origin, but those are a couple others that I thought just put out incredibly awesome and revolutionary stuff, and other than being kind of cult hit companies on the more hardcore PC audience, they never really got elevated that much. Like I remember, I'll throw one thing out there. I guess like I remember System Shock 2, like playing System Shock 2 and being just completely blown away by that game, and to think that it didn't really sell that well. I mean, it got amazing ratings, and now everybody talks about it being overrated, almost to the point that like it's become overrated by the merit of it being so underrated, which is something I call the Gunstar Heroes zone, and I'll talk about that in another episode. But it was tragic to see some of this stuff like so brilliant. Like, yeah, Thief and System Shock 2 out of them, for instance, were just amazing to me, and just came out, got good reviews, sold less than 1 million copies. I think maybe System Shock 2 finally got up to 500,000, but when you look at how good that game was, it deserved to do so much better.
Well, Phil, you just scored a great deal of points, because if he could, Woodsie would tattoo the word System Shock 2 backward on his forehead so we could see it in the mirror every morning.
I'm like that too. If I was going to say I had a favorite game in terms of the comparison to everything else, its contemporaries at the time, I would have to narrow it down to either System Shock 2 or Mario 64 as my two kind of most mind-blowing, awesome games in my life. Like nothing else lives up to the feeling of playing each of those for the first time for me. So
Mario 64, I remember starting it up, and it has that fly-through with the castle, and you're coming up to Mario, and I'm like thinking, this is the game. This is the game right now.
Yeah, this is not a cutscene. This is insane. But no credit to console gaming. So Mario 64, it sucks. It's much better. But anyway, yeah. What else? What else did you guys want to throw out? Because I have another one I'm thinking of, but I'll let you guys toss a couple out first.
I have one which it actually has gained quite a bit more of notoriety over time, but when it first came out, it was really unknown, and I have to credit Woodsie on discovering this game, because he and I every now and then will go through the store page on Steam and just look for bargain bin games that look interesting.
I have a feeling you're going to name the game I'm thinking of, but go ahead.
He called me one night and said, I just found this game, and I think your brother was playing it.
I saw it on like a random YouTube
thing. And he called and he said, you and another friend of ours who goes by Rousdare, he said, get online right now, and this game is Magica.
Oh yeah, Magica. Yeah, that game's brilliant. I love that.
Game, for me, for example, just Left 4 Dead as an example, there are very few games that make me react in my seat as if what's happening on screen is actually happening, and so I will get animated and very vocal when playing Left 4 Dead. That same thing happens to me in Magica. We have gotten ourselves into the most insane hijinks in that game. It's also very difficult. That's the other thing. It can be very difficult, and the fact that there's an achievement to try and beat the game in 4 hours, which we've set, it's on our bucket list. We haven't tried it yet. But that game was not only difficult, but it was silly. It didn't take itself that seriously, but it was immensely fun, and it had the best voice acting in the history of entertainment.
Yeah, that weird like every time I play Magica with my friends for a couple of hours, my throat always hurts and is hoarse from like laughing and yelling so much while playing that game. It's one of the greatest multiplayer, even though it's this simple little thing. Really, well, I guess you can look at it that way, but it's really just an awesome multiplayer experience. Couldn't give it enough props.
What I love about it, just kind of as a paradigm in terms of how games are made, whereas some games give you all of the skills and say, this is how you use them most effectively, here's what you do. Or even something like WoW, where you have all these different skills, but there has been like a fine-tuned scientific method for determining the best spell rotation. Magica, they give you the tools. They say, here are elemental spells. Combine them however you want. And there are certainly some that are very powerful that people use frequently, but I found that they gave you the toolbox and said, do whatever you want. And what we ended up finding in our groups of 3 or 4 were people just had their preferences. They had their pet spells that were their go-to, and it was, and we eventually became role players in a sense. Like I would be in charge of crowd control and kind of getting the enemy all soaking wet. And then Woodsie would rain fire from above, and then someone else would, bring lightning down to electrocute him, and then I would thunderbolt and occasionally hit Woodsie in the top of his head and explode him.
Kill him too. Yeah.
I felt that it was great that they just gave players the tools and said, we're not going to tell you how best to play this game. You figure it out. And I've seen some footage. We've posted some in some of our earlier videos. Some of the things people have done in that game, I never thought they could do, even knowing the abilities you have. I didn't think that it was possible, and it made me want to log back on and try it.
Yeah, it's really something. I mean, it was a couple hours playing it before I even realized some of the combination elements that exist that you can make. Like before I found out about Steam, for instance, and then like all of the weird spells combinations you can make with Steam. It's awesome. I mean, really, I could just spend hours and hours randomly messing around in it, and I think way more than most games, it's one of those games that you can just play through the first couple levels of it over and over and over again because of the way it just throws the tools at you and you can use them in so many different ways. It never really stops being fun. It never really feels repetitive. It never really feels like I've already seen all this, because that's never the case in a game that's like so chaotic and has so many possibilities of what you can do.
Another big thing about it is the gameplay from playing it by yourself to playing with other people changes so drastically in terms of how selective you have to be and how much discretion you have to use with your spells. And because even if you fail and there's friendly fire and you kill someone, it's funny. Like, they're not mad at you. You
can just easily revive them, with a simple spell. So I couldn't agree more with that one. It's awesome. You got
oh, okay. I was gonna throw it to you, but you throw it to me. That's fine. And I wanted to also bring up that I got into PC gaming in the late '90s and early 2000s, so my perspective is a little bit different than Phil's, and Phil has more to say in terms of the historical aspect of PC gaming. So my underrated game, it got good reviews, it got good scores, but nobody really ever talks about it, and I honestly never thought anything of it, was the Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay.
Oh man, I love the Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay.
The gameplay, the way it mixed stealth and just kind of going in and full bore shooting things, it was amazing. You could do both. You can do a mix. You can do one, and the intro to that game for me is the best intro I've ever seen.
Yeah, awesome take on a tutorial sequence.
Yeah, it was, and the voice acting was fabulous. And you would think, but what, Vin Diesel, Chronicles of Riddick? What, are you crazy? Are you out of your mind?
I love Vin Diesel. I will fight to the grave to defend the honor of Vin Diesel.
But it was, and maybe I went into it with such low expectations that it just completely blew me away that a game like this could even be remotely good.
No, that game is honestly brilliant. And another, sorry, go ahead.
When people talk about shooters, I mean, you could call Riddick, from the mechanic perspective, it's a shooter. Nobody ever talks about Riddick. It's always, talking about BioShock or talking about Deus Ex, and Deus Ex is one of my favorite games. And those types of titles, but nobody ever brings up Riddick. And I think it's sad, because Riddick is a really fascinating game.
Riddick is brilliant, and it holds the torch for me for so many things. It had the best melee combat in a first-person game ever, even better than Breakdown, and that was the whole gimmick of that game. I thought it combined disparate elements so well, because it had shooting, it had stealth, it had parts where you were just running around talking to people and like solving problems and fighting with your fists or with melee weapons in these rings, and it was all really fun. None of it felt like, oh, well, we're just going to throw this element in here to mix it up. It all felt, very, very well done, very competently done, like it was all part of the vision from the beginning. But one thing that I give Riddick tons of credit for that I find no one seems to bring up now is everybody obsesses about this idea of immersion in games, right? And dealing with the HUD and all of the elements in such a way that they are not in the way of the immersion of the game. And I felt Riddick was probably the first game that I remember it feeling so immersive, because they really cleverly came up with all of these ways to merge mechanics into the environment in some way. Like, it didn't have this really busy HUD. It didn't have all this stuff thrown in your face. You only had the little boxes in the corner to indicate your health. When you crouched, when you were in stealth, you got a little black ring around the edge, or everything would turn slightly purple. I forget which, and it just worked so well. It helped so much in terms of making me feel like I'm just that character running around in this world that didn't have all these HUDs and all this crap floating around on my screen. And it was, in my opinion, one of the first games to do that really well, and it seems like nobody brings that up now.
In terms of health regeneration, I'm not a big fan of health regeneration at all. I was okay with the way Riddick did it, because if you had a box, you had, your health was boxes. So if you had like if you got into a fight and one box was halfway, you would get that regenerated, but that was it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I thought that
it was kind of like what Max Payne did.
Yeah, you got, I mean, it was cool because you got enough regeneration that getting hit by a stray bullet here and there wouldn't just whittle your health down to 0 over the course of the game. But because it was limited to the box, you couldn't just run out, blast a bunch of people till you were almost dead, then get behind a crate, then come out 5 seconds later with full health.
Exactly. So what? You guys are kind of quiet over there.
Yeah, you guys are like, Riddick, that game sucks.
Oh, no. Actually, I remember when that game came out. Did it ever come out for PC?
Yeah.
Yes.
It did, okay.
Yeah.
Those were one of those things that came out. I remember it came out for console first, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the time, I didn't own an Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3 or Xbox, whatever it came out on. And it was one of those games I never played, and I always felt bad I didn't play. And the reason I didn't get it at first, because it came out, and I remember my brother telling me, this game, The Chronicles of Riddick, and he'd see my expression on my face, he's like, wait, it's supposed to be great. And I couldn't justify like buying a console just to play one game at the time. Mm-hmm. And it kind of fell off my radar, and I didn't know it came out for PC eventually, which now I'm thinking I should go out and play it.
I was actually just going to say that it's a game that I only, I recognize by name certainly, but I never had any experience watching it or playing it. But given that you two fine gentlemen have such credibility, I feel that I'm now compelled to go check it out.
I mean, hey, there's this. Well, it's a shame we didn't have this conversation 2 weeks earlier because they just put out Assault on Dark Athena on GOG, which is the sequel, but it also includes the whole campaign from the original game, which is awesome. It's also on Steam. It's $10 on the sale right now, but if it goes on a flash deal or a daily deal, it'll probably be $5. So I would highly. What?
Did you play Dark Athena? I didn't.
Yeah, it wasn't quite as good in my opinion, but it was still a really solid game.
But yeah, I mean I picked up Chronicles of Riddick at CompUSA for I think $15 or something, and it's right up there with one of the best purchases I've ever made.
Yeah, it's a brilliant game.
Can I still go to CompUSA and buy that?
Unfortunately not. I still
CompUSA.
I so miss CompUSA because it seemed like their really massive game section, at least the one by my house, had a really massive game section, but it was practically uncontrolled. Like they had no idea what any of that stuff was, and games would have seemingly random prices on them. So sometimes I would go and get a game for $5 a week after it came out because they just didn't know it was new or stuff like that. Yeah. It was good times. I think that CompUSA is probably not the norm, but it was great.
I wonder why they went out of business.
Yeah. Well, it's sad.
$55.
Yeah. Well, hey, for the consumer, it's great though. So.
Indeed.
Okay, Phil, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So my game, I already mentioned that stuff by Looking Glass, which I kind of consider to be my go-to underrated, brilliant PC stuff. But the specific game I had in mind is one that's not so much unequivocally brilliant. It has a lot of problems, but it had a few things that it did really well and a few things that were really interesting about it that seemed to just fall by the wayside because everybody just went, oh, this game is just pretty average, and nobody really bought it. Well, I shouldn't say that because it did wind up getting a bit of a cult following later, and I think it's one of the darling games on Reddit right now. But it's Alpha Protocol. I don't know if any of you guys have played this game, but it was this kind of stealth action spy simulator RPG. And there were a couple things about the mechanics that were kind of broken. Certain character builds were so badly underpowered that the game became impossible and stuff like that. But what was there that was well done was just so impressive and so incredible because it was about building all of these different relationships with all of these different characters. And it wasn't just, well, you gain points and get these people to like you, but rather people could like you or they could hate you. And based on whether they liked you or hated you, they could aid you or impede you in all of these different missions in all these different ways. So it could play out so dramatically different. There was like 20 different versions of the ending depending on which characters would survive or which ones would help you in the end. And the whole dialogue system was cool. You would pick an emotion to respond to somebody with, and your character would go the rest of the way, and you would get favor or not, and it was time limited, so you only had so much leeway in terms of how to respond, and it was very, very cool. It was another game that I could go back and play again, and it's one I've been thinking about doing another run, because all of that stuff with the way relationships with the characters worked was so engaging, and it never really got much of a fair shake, I don't think. I remember when I was playing it, I would get all these messages from like random friends on Steam going like, "Lol, that game sucks, haha, you suck for playing it," and I'm like, come on, you should
have great friends, Phil.
Yeah, I don't know, I got friends that like to troll me with stuff like that. Whenever I'm playing a game that's average or whatever, they're very quick to send me messages about why I'm wasting my time playing this crappy game.
That game is ugly, therefore you are ugly.
Yeah. But yeah, for me, Alpha Protocol, I honestly think it deserved a little more play, and I am kind of happy to see that it's got a bit of a following online now, is kind of a sleeper hit, but I think it kind of is one of the recent examples I can think of a sort of underappreciated, it's so cliche to say gem now, but underappreciated game.
Well, you know what, I'll have to, that's just like another one I'll have to put on my list. I know of it, I've heard of it, and I know it's like loved by certain people, but I've never actually played it.
I think the dialogue mechanic is really interesting, how you respond with an emotion rather than just a list of phrases you can come back with, because Woodsie and I have had a lot of discussions about how better character interaction or NPC interaction can be done so it feels a little more real, or it feels as though what you're doing has some sort of effect, as opposed to there's a predetermined modifier of, if you answer this way, he's 0.87 times more likely to help you as opposed to 0.56. So I think that's interesting. It's definitely, I think, worth checking out.
If I'm going to have a predetermined line to respond to something, I need Tim Schafer to write it. Otherwise,
I need Joss Whedon or Aaron Sorkin to write it.
Tim Schafer or Ron Gilbert, they can write it. Otherwise, an emotion-based one is better.
Yeah, I thought it worked really well, and there were a lot of places where, for instance, a character would ask you a question and your answer would be the same, but you can choose whether to say it in like a cocky way or a professional way or whatever. And it wasn't just certain characters prefer you to act a certain way. It was a lot more complicated than that. Like the situation made a difference, whether you were, how well you knew that person already. I mean, there were seemingly so many hidden variables there taken into account, and that was something very nice to see, because shortly after that game came out, you had a lot of other games getting flack for how artificial the choices in it seemed. Like Dragon Age 2 was one that got really crucified for that, well, you make all these choices, but in the end, it all turns out the same anyway, none of it matters. And Alpha Protocol was a game where it seemed like every choice mattered and everything could turn out differently, and that was very, very cool. So despite people complaining about games not having that, here's a game that does it very, very well, and despite having other problems, of course, and yet it seems like nobody's really, not too many people are really talking about it. So I'd recommend checking it out, but if you do, maybe look up a walkthrough on how to build your character so that you don't break the game for yourself. But other than that, it's a great game.
I don't know that I disagree. Like, I kind of like the idea of actually thinking about what you're going to use in the game and whether it'll be useful. Like there's skills that are not as good as other skills,
like Fallout 3 type skills,
right?
Some
yeah, no. I mean,
it's like if we're gonna make a raid on a government building, and you're like, okay, you get good with assault rifles, I'll get good with slingshots, and they should both be viable.
I mean, as a general principle, I agree, but Alpha Protocol, I don't know if it got patched or whatever, but Alpha Protocol just had certain skills that shouldn't have been useful but just objectively became useful or useless, and certain boss fights, because in the game you have a lot of leeway about how you can handle problems. You can use stealth, you can talk your way through stuff, you don't necessarily have to fight, but there are a few places in there where there are boss fights that are unavoidable, sort of like the most recent Deus Ex. Some people complain about this as well, that you can approach it anyway, but then there's these boss fights you always have to fight, and if your character's not spec towards them, it can be very difficult. Well, Alpha Protocol had some boss fights where if your skill with one of two weapons or a certain weapon wasn't built up enough, the boss fight would become literally impossible because they would never be out of cover long enough for you to get a beat on them or something like that. So it is a case of that skill system actually being kind of broken. Like they didn't quite plan for that stuff. But like I say, if you look up quickly, like, okay, focus only on one weapon and these few things to avoid, then it's fine.
I think that a game should allow magic to be a skill, but not in any way that magic has been defined in video games. I want your character to learn how to do magic tricks and use that to persuade people to like them.
Dude, that was great. Yeah. Was Card the queen of hearts?
Yeah. I actually had two other games I wanted to mention just real quick.
Go for it.
To being kind of underrated. One of them, again, another one that had a certain amount of hype, but only because of the name attached to it. That's, as I mentioned before, Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. And really, it only got hype because 38 Studios was started by Kurt Schilling. And in one of our videos, we talked about how the company went bankrupt and is now owned by Rhode Island, and just how it completely fell apart.
Yeah,
so
that was really weird.
Hype. Yeah, that was pretty bad. But I felt that game, the combat I thought was amazing, and also the game world felt very Warcrafty to me, but the art style that they put on it, I thought was really interesting. And so the game, it feels to me, especially now since it's probably discounted, it feels to me like it's worth a playthrough if anyone's interested, because the way you can build your character really was, and just some of the things you could do, some of the weapon models, armor models were really cool. So that game I think deserved a little more.
Is the only
praise.
game I ever played that made wands fun.
Yeah, that's another thing that Woodsie talked about. Because if you have any kind of a caster in World of Warcraft, wands were useless. They were used to gain additional stats, or even if you were completely out of mana as a priest, you wouldn't turn to your wand. You'd rather die.
I'd rather sit here and do nothing.
Exactly. And
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I'm playing through that game right now, actually, and I totally agree with that. I find it a really fun game. But sorry, go ahead.
The other game, and we did a video on it a while ago, is Hard Reset, which certainly has some flaws, to be sure. The story moves so quickly, and suddenly it's all of a sudden over. It's not a very long game at all. But the kind of cyberpunk game, the steampunk, I guess, kind of game world is really interesting. It's very dark. The enemies you fight are pretty scary because they zerg you, and you often don't see them coming. And just the way the weapon system worked, I thought was really interesting. First of all, the weapons are loud, which I love. I just love with headphones on and just hearing this assault rifle fire ring in my ears. But basically you have just one weapon, and as you upgrade it and kind of switch which weapon functionality you want, the weapon itself transforms. Like you see these like little servos firing and little compartments suddenly shoot out. So the weapon transforms into what you want it to be, as opposed to switching between different weapons. And
yeah, that's awesome. It's super cool.
It's a unique way to approach weapon design.
When I first heard about Hard Reset and the fact that you were only going to have 2 weapons available, I thought, what? That doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about? And then as I played the preview build from Flying Wild Hog, it was like, oh, that's the way it's going to be? Well, man, that's awesome.
Yeah, some of the boss fights are really cool too with the weapons you can use.
That is a great game. It's old school, frantic, just hordes of enemies, and good luck because you're going to die and die a lot.
Yeah, I refer to games like that as big dumb fun.
Yeah,
exactly.
Dude, isn't that exactly what I said about Serious Sam 3 a few episodes ago? That like a game that just embraces its stupidity, and Hard Reset kind of feels like that. I mean, I love that game. I can't get enough of it. It's awesome.
I respect developers who don't think that they're going to make the next blockbuster that people will play for 7 or 8 years. They just want to make a game that they may only play it for 5 or 10 hours, but they will enjoy the hell out of those 5 or 10 hours.
Well, when you get developers in there and they want to try to expand their horizons, we want to grab this audience or grab that audience. Flying Wild Hog said, look, we're going to make a shooter. It's going to be fun. There's going to be hordes of enemies. And, the story is just kind of secondary. It's kind of like what they did with Painkiller. It's just fun. They're not trying to be the next Citizen Kane. They're not trying to be anything other than what they are. And when you see these developers go out and they're trying to grab different audiences, they almost always fail.
When Shepherd and I do a review of a game, I've come up with this rule that I've just seen throughout my game playing career. And it's basically, when you're playing the game, do you have the feeling that they made the game that they want to play? Like, they get on, they're like, okay, the game's done. Let's all play, guys. or did they just make a game that
Yeah,
they were
thank
told
God
to?
it's finished. Let's ship this thing. And
Yeah.
hope it sells.
You mean like Postal 3?
Oh, come on now. No, we don't need to bring that up.
Well, that's what when I read interviews, I'm kind of going through the StarCraft book series right now, and I'm just absolutely loving it. I'm about like 6 or 7 books in, but in the introduction of one of them, a guy who was he was a lead designer on Diablo and the first StarCraft, and he said that as soon like the guys would in their after hours, they would ask their bosses if they could stay for like just not even work, just unpaid and everything, if they could stay and just keep playing the game. That's how much they loved it, and that to me is, I think, for those who make games, that's the dream. You're making something for people that you yourself would also love to play.
That's exactly.
Yeah,
that's a lot of the indie developers I interview. I get that vibe from them, and some of the AAA guys that I've kind of dealt with and maybe not done an interview with, I get that vibe too. It's like, I really don't want to talk about this game because I just don't like it.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame. I mean, when you're trying to make I guess when you're trying to make these shooting gallery type, this is something we've talked about on here before, but the sort of lowest common denominator, something that's gonna have some broad base appeal for everybody, and it's just some, I don't know, generic or some big action thing or whatever. You're kind of designing a game that you think is going to be something that just about everyone's going to like somehow, rather than sometimes the indie people will just do these really fun, quirky, focused experiences, and those can be almost better at times. And occasionally you get this sense of, oh, well, we want to make a game that's going to sell 3 million units, and because you make a game that, you want to sell to 3 million people, you might not dig it that much because you're trying to make it for everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. So, are we done with that particular topic?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say we have been running quite long, so this bit
we're at
Adam.
We're at an hour and 13. I think we're okay for a little bit longer. Unless, well, I can edit this part out. What do you guys feel? I have an idea that I've been kind of thinking about as we've been talking, and I know we wanted to talk about the digital distribution, but I don't know if 15 minutes would be long enough. So I have a question here, kind of like an ad lib section. If you guys wanted to have me throw this out there and talk about it, what do you think?
Certainly.
What is it?
Sure.
What is it? I can't tell you.
All right. All right. Well, let's.
Okay.
The subject is croissant sandwiches. Are they necessary?
I love croissant sandwiches. Yes.
Phil and I are on board. Phil, I'm coming to Germany. Let's get some croissant sandwiches.
Yes, I'm all for that.
Which one of you guys totally bashed craft singles? On one of your videos that I saw, one of you guys talked about craft singles.
What was it was an analogy. I was making the analogy that people say, well, it's sold a lot, so therefore it's the best.
Oh,
and
that's right.
Well, Kraft cheese, I'm sure, sells a lot of cheese, but can you say that it's the best cheese?
Or that it's cheese?
That's right. That's right.
Depends on what you're using it for, because I will have you know, despite the crappiness of Kraft cheese, it can be very nice on burgers because that American cheese has that certain melt to it that like a slice of just regular cheddar won't have.
We all agree
that American plastic has a nice melt to it.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, even legit chefs will say, like, American cheese, it's not that great, but on burgers it just works. So.
I'm engineered to please.
we have a saying between us that we even actually shared on the channel called a rule that we call the Goonies rule, and it was one of our videos that basically I told the story of how I had a discussion with a guy, Rousdower, my roommate, and he said the Goonies was a great movie, and I said the Goonies is not a great movie. Like, objectively, it's terrible, but you love the Goonies.
Yeah.
Right?
Good.
Subjectively. And he wouldn't agree with that, but we came up with a rule that whenever we say, look, I love this thing, but I'm Goonies ruling it, it means we know it's terrible. Objectively, but we love it so much.
The Expendables was a terrible movie, but I love that movie.
Okay. Yeah, I completely agree with that sentiment on that movie.
Well, that kind of dovetails into the question I had. And
you mean that wasn't the question? I thought it was about cheese.
Sorry.
Oh yeah,
no.
that's right. We got
Actually, Tillamook Extra Sharp is the best, by the way. I want to because I have a contract with the Tillamook people. They're going to sponsor the site, so I needed to talk to them.
Can you imagine if we had just ads for cheese everywhere in the...
I will Swiss you to death, sir.
Okay.
Welcome
Like, hey,
to our
when you're
discussion. It's brought to you by cheese.
When you're fragging your buddies in Quake, you don't have to be like really outdated.
Exactly. For somebody to go to the site and the first thing they see is a landing ad for cheese.
For cheese, that's got,
cheese is an institution, a global institution. So you know the website has made it if you're advertising for cheese.
Yeah.
that's true, actually.
There was a screenshot on Reddit somebody posted, and it was of Skyrim. It was a mountain, and the mountain was covered in cheese wheels.
Yeah.
Brought to you by Tillamook.
Gamers are fueled by cheese.
Well, what's your question, Adam?
So let's do the question. How about that?
Yeah.
What were some of the PC games that were either broken or terrible that you loved?
Oh, so
Alpha
it's a Goonies
Protocol.
role.
Alpha Protocol kind of fills that category for me as well.
Right. Goonies rule. Okay.
Well, for me, and it's a game that was so broken I couldn't play it on my own computer, and I had to play it at someone else's house. And that is the original Stalker game. And I know a lot of people had issues with that game being broken and it not working on their system. I didn't have I wasn't a power user back then, but I had a perfectly competent machine that could run Stalker on all the settings you should be able to run it on. It just simply wouldn't work. I get out of the little bunker into the open world, and it was choppy. I could barely function. And I found that it was buggy when I played it at my friend's house as well. But that game, to me, did so many things wonderfully, and it was a shame that it had this reputation for being buggy, and I think that's why they lost a lot of customers early on, and that people felt that they weren't going to support the game. So I think they lost a lot of that good faith from a consumer base. And then when Call of Pripyat comes out, and it ends up being one of those games that is used as a standard benchmark for all of for GPUs and things like that, that and Metro 33 and I think Dirt 2 or something like that. So, but it's as a franchise, I think they've kind of repaired their image a little bit. But yeah, the first Stalker game, to me, broken on my own machine, but even when I played it fully, it was buggy. But I thought that the game did so many things well.
Yeah, I can see that. I agree with that.
Are you talking about broken, like it doesn't work right, the game, or is like the mechanic?
Or it's just a game that's like objectively not that good, but you really love it.
Or there were terrible bugs. It's kind of like with Stalker. Stalker's a really good example.
I have to Goonies rule on PlanetSide. The amount of time you have to put in that game to pull out and draw out an ounce of like awesome fun is
immense.
The scale is just way off. But when you do get it, it's freaking amazing. When you're like power dropping 20, 40 people onto a base and take over the engineering room or what have you. But like just to jump on, like I want to play PlanetSide for 5 minutes and get my kill on, never happen. It will never freaking happen. So I mean, for me, PlanetSide was a great concept and has those moments where you're just like, how come I never stop? How come I don't just play this for the rest of my life? But you'll invest hours to get that.
I've got a good one for this question.
Go ahead.
Any of you guys play Dead Island? Because for me, it practically it should be the example for this concept of a game that is just janky and buggy and has so many problems, and on a purely objective level is bad in a lot of ways, but it's just amazingly endearing and fun despite that.
I played it for a few minutes, but from people I know who have played it for a lot, they say that pretty much the exact same thing.
Yeah. Dead Island is totally my Goonies rule game. I had a brilliant time. We had like this meta game of like me and my friends that played through it together. We would take all these screenshots of when the game would jank out and character models would get stuck in things, or NPCs would randomly like deflate like balloons, and we would always share the pictures with each other on Steam after each game, and it added so much more. Like the bad parts made it even more fun.
That's awesome.
For me, it was Bloodlines. It was Vampire the Masquerade.
Oh yeah,
Bloodlines.
that's a great example.
It was so terrible when it was first released. It crashed all the time. The audio was skipping. There were audio like blips and clips and all kinds of weird things happening. People would get stuck in environments, but the story behind it was so great for me that, you put up with all of this stuff. And I'm just glad that the modders out there were releasing these unofficial patches after Troika went out. And it was awful, technically awful, but everything else made up for it.
It was one of those games I had to go to a friend's house because I was young, and I would just go to his house, and he just considered it not even worth it. But every time I go over there, I'd say, "Hey, can I play Alone in the Dark?" And he would just look at me like, "That thing again?" It was I don't know if it was my child brain that was broken or the game was just messed up, but I tried to play that over and over and over again. But that's how I remember it. Just being this broken game that I can never figure out.
Yeah, Alone in the Dark was great. I mean, yeah, I guess it was pretty broken too, but it was a fun game. It was Resident Evil before that was a thing.
That's true. That's true.
Resident Evil 5, Woodsie and I ran into a broken final boss fight, but that game was still very fun. But I have a game that it was broken. I didn't actually get to play much of it, but it's more of not that it was broken but still great, but broken, and I have such high hopes for it. And it was Sherlock Holmes, I think The Awakening, maybe. I am an absolute Sherlock Holmes fanatic. Arthur Conan Doyle's collection of books is my favorite series of books, so I had such high hopes for a Sherlock Holmes game. I was hoping it would somehow capture the elements of it. It simply got to a point where you had to break into this warehouse by throwing this line over the door and like lifting the latch kind of thing, and it literally would not let me progress to the rest of it. But I've encountered many games, and some of them aren't really coming to me right now, but this was one that stands out, that the game was broken, and I didn't get to say it was a good game, but I had such high hopes, and it's so disappointing that it just wasn't polished.
Right.
Hey, was that the Sherlock Holmes Cthulhu mythos game, The Awakening? Is that the one I'm thinking of? Because I remember one of those Sherlock Holmes games had this weird crossover with Cthulhu, and it was really fascinating. And I think that was the one, but maybe I'm thinking about.
I'm not sure. It's been a few years now, and I haven't attempted to play it again since it was broken, so I'm not sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, never mind. If that's the game I'm thinking of, it was very cool, but maybe it's not.
I have a question about a game, if I could, real quick, and I only ask because right now we have Skype up on Woodsie's screen, but he has his Steam store page up in the background, and we were looking at Orcs Must Die right before this call.
That game is awesome. Buy it.
That's my question, because for the last hour and 20-some minutes, it's been the slideshow of the screenshots from the game.
Orcs Must Die is fantastic. Yeah, there's no...
It's like orc innards splattered everywhere.
Yeah, it's worth more than the $15, so it's completely worth the $4 they want.
It's $3.74.
That's a steal and a half.
Buy it and buy the DLC for it just so they get more money.
I like it.
It's fantastic.
It's been a really great discussion. I really enjoy listening to everybody's perspective, and maybe somewhere down the road we can work together again, or you guys can come on, or we can do something. So it's really had a lot of fun.
Certainly.
Play some crappy games together.
Right. Let's go blow some crap up in Magic Go.
We should
definitely.
Go to Crappy Games Marathon.
Right.
Oh, please no. Please no.
The TruePCGaming and the ThePCelitist attempt at the 4-hour Magic achievement.
Right.
Get it done.
That's an even worse idea than a Crappy Games Marathon.
Well, yeah, I think we're done, so why don't you take us out, Phil?
All right, we're out.